Prop 135 is stupid. It's a dumb idea by dumb people to trick idiots out of their money. To have Prop 135 on the ballot is a national embarrassment. People should think less of Arizona as a state because of the existence of Prop 135. It's as if Arizona decided to have a vote on a new state bird, and the suggested replacement was a rock. Prop 135 is an attempt to, regulate, let's say, the government power to declare a state of emergency. Now, to a normal person, this might seem like a weird thing to become divisive, but a short trip down memory lane should make everything clearer. Remember COVID? Yeah, the pandemic and the quarantine. Remember all that? Conservatives running around screaming death threats at school boards, crazy people marching through Target while wearing diapers on their faces, and the president telling you to drink bleach to clean yourself out. Good times, right? I mean, aside from all those people who died, probably a bummer for them. Anyway, conservatives really liked it when they could use fictitious claims of government tyranny to mobilize supporters and money. Especially the money part. Oh god, the money part was great. Yeah, they loved the money part. That was awesome. Enter the driving force behind Prop 135, the Arizona Free Enterprise Club. Using publicly available data, let's look at their revenues for the past 20 years. You can see their revenues remain mostly flat right up until 2020. In 2020, they spike up hard, drop a bit in 2021, and then double their 2020 high in 2022. So yeah, they really like COVID. Please ignore 2014 when they hit $7 million in revenue. That is a rabbit hole that is labeled corruption, subclass, nepotism. If you are really curious, I have a link in the description to an Arizona Mirror story on the subject, but for our purposes, it's just important to know that the pandemic was a massive money winner for the Arizona Free Enterprise Club. In 2023, they wanted to keep the good time money train rolling, so they brought Prop 135 to the Arizona State Legislature to put on the ballot in 2024. Prop 135 in its initial form is a monument to the poor research practices of the Arizona Free Enterprise Club. The first version of Prop 135 stated that all states of emergency, excluding those based on war, are going to last 30 days unless the legislature meets in a special session and extends it. The legislature then has to keep meeting in a special session every 30 days as long as the state of emergency persists. The legislature can also adjust whatever powers the governor has during this state of emergency. The Free Enterprise Club was looking to make it impossible for any prolonged states of emergency to exist, as they assumed that all states of emergency were very short-lived affairs. I mean, without looking or doing any research, states of emergency involving fires or floods only last as long as a disaster, and maybe a little after that. COVID was an outlier, a fluke. All other states of emergency only last as long as the emergency. States of emergency don't last for years, right? Right? So it is at this point I actually want to bring out someone from the Arizona Free Enterprise Club. Aimee Yentes, VP for the club, appeared to make the case for Prop 135 in the Arizona Senate. It did not go well. Here is Yentes' introduction, making the best possible case for the bill that would eventually become Prop 135.
In 2021, post-COVID, the legislature grappled with how to address deficiencies in Arizona's emergency powers. It was clear, whether you agreed or disagreed with the policies implemented by the previous administration, that the governor had a great deal of unchecked authority. The governor only can declare a state of emergency. There was no time limit on that declaration, and the governor has the power to modify or suspend any regulation or statute. The safety valve was the declaration could be terminated by the legislature if they pass a concurrent resolution. These powers are prescribed by statute, but proved ineffectual if the legislature was not convened in regular session, because the authority was superseded by the Constitution, which gives the governor the unilateral authority to call a special session. This has improved since the passage of last year's bill, SB 1009, which starting this year limits the governor's ability to issue an initial proclamation for a state of emergency to a period of 30 days. This can be extended for a total of 120 days in 30-day increments by the legislature or the governor, with legislative approval and builds-in reporting requirements by the executive to the legislative body. There's one key area, in our opinion, this legislation does not correct, however, and that is resolving the mechanism that would require the governor to call the legislature into special session.
Yes, you live under a Democratic tyrant of a governor, and the only one who can save you is a Republican legislature. What a novel position to take. You must have spent all day coming up with that. I'm sure you wouldn't completely reverse your position if it was a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature. I'm sure this would be a very consistent position no matter who controlled the legislature and the governorship. Before moving on, though, I do want to examine her initial supposition. Just briefly. Humor me on this. Ms. Yentes said that the governor can suspend any law during a state of emergency. Looking at the relevant law in this case, this appears to be true. It states that the governor may suspend any statute that would interfere in dealing with a state of emergency. Of course, if you look up even a little bit, the line right above that says it only applies during a state of war emergency. During every other state of emergency, the governor can't do that. Now, going to Ms. Yentes' bill that would put Prop 135 on the ballot, it specifically excludes state of war emergencies, which would mean that her initial statement of the governor being able to overturn laws being a big problem would most definitely not be addressed by Prop 135, which, what? Why would you bring that up if it's so easily verifiable is not true? Now, I know the most likely answer to any question as to why a conservative said something that wasn't true is that they are lying. To enter any conservative media space is to suffer a deluge of dishonesty, but I don't think that is the case here. I don't think Aimee Yentes was lying when she said this. I just think she's really stupid. I mean, really stupid. To pinpoint her stupidity, let's talk about something else she said during her speech. She talked about SB 1009 from 2022, which she says puts limits on all states of emergency. It does not. It is applicable only in cases where the state of emergency has a health-related cause. So right from the jump, it seems she doesn't understand the difference between different types of states of emergency. Which is bad. As in, this is the expert from the group responsible for Prop 135. She seems very uninformed about the topic as a whole. Do you think Democrats of the Senate Government Committee are going to notice? Do you think maybe they're going to ask about it? Here's your chance to find out. Senator Juan Mendes up with the first question, a very obvious one. He asks if Prop 135 is related to COVID, because, yeah, kinda obvious.
To start off with, I was wondering is it only the most recent emergencies that were considered when this bill was put together?
Chairman Senator Mendes, I'm not entirely sure what you're getting at with your question. Obviously, this has to do with any state emergency that could be called, either conceived of by the framers or, ones that we haven't conceived of yet. So whether that's everything except a state of an emergency declared as a state of war, that would be the exception.
What, COVID? What's a COVID? I've never heard of this COVID. Who is this COVID you speak of? Is he a gentleman caller? Oh, how wonderful. I hope he can join Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy when they come over for tea. Yeah, if you'll notice, she's going very out of her way to avoid mentioning COVID, which is weird, but I think I can hazard a guess as to the cause behind this rhetorical strategy. I think this is an attempt to make Prop 135 more palatable for normie Republicans. Screaming about e-veter medicine and drinking bleach doesn't really play well with the country club set. And since no Democrat is going to vote for this turkey, they were going to need every Republican vote they could get to get this turd over the finish line. So X-nay on the Ovid K. So if ranting about Chinese people infecting American with COVID to sap our precious bodily fluids is off the table, what does Aimee have to bring to an argument?
Balance of powers, balance of powers, the balance of powers. The ultimate question of the balance of powers belongs.
Which feels a little hypocritical to offer up as a conservative when there's a Democrat in the governor's mansion and the legislature is controlled by Republicans. Just a little bit. But hypocrisy does play well with normie Republicans, and since it's directed at a Democratic governor, it's good enough, I guess. But here's the thing. Senator Mendes wasn't asking if this was about COVID as a gotcha. That wasn't the point. He was really curious about something else, something that anyone who knows anything about states of emergency has been screaming at this video for a while now. Apologies to them for waiting this long to get to the fun reveal. Let's let Senator Mendes ask his follow-up, where he probes a little deeper on Club VP Yentes' knowledge of states of emergency.
Mr. Chairman and Ms. Yentes, are you aware of the current emergencies that we're under right now?
Chairman Senator Mendes, maybe you'd like to enlighten me. I'm not sure exactly what
Mr. Chairman and Ms. Yentes, we're currently under 34 different emergencies right now, right? So if this bill was to, if this proposal was
Senator Mendes, which ones?
Lots of them.
But can you tell us more specifically?
Lots of them. The biggest one is the drought that we put in since the 90s.
Yeah, at the time of this hearing, there were a metric ton of declared states of emergency, including one that dated back to 1999. which would be something a normal person would look up if you were going to pass a constitutional amendment about states of emergency. A normal person would know to do that. If, on the other hand, you were a brain-poisoned conservative who only knows about states of emergency from watching Alex Jones and Glenn Beck, then yeah, you might not know what an actual state of emergency is. Guess which one Aimee is? By the way, the guy who tried to bail out Aimee is Jake Hoffman. He thought he was so clever by trying to stump Senator Mendes by blurting out, "Name one!" But then Mendes drops the hammer on him with the drought. As in, you need an example of an active state of emergency? How about the one we've been in for 24 years that even a first grader should know about? How about that? Oh, you didn't know about that one, Jake? Or are you just practicing playing stupid as a rehearsal for your upcoming trial for trying to overturn the 2020 election? Remember the drought, by the way. It's going to come up in the weirdest way later. To be more specific on states of emergency, the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs, real name, issues an annual report on all active states of emergency. The latest one was issued in September of 23. I'll link to it in the description. It's a fun read, even if you don't find the subject matter interesting. It's also instructive to see why states of emergency can persist for so long. For example, there has been a state of emergency declared for monsoon flooding since September 28, 2021. Now, does that mean there is currently flooding or a state of danger? No. The state of emergency is left in place to facilitate recovery. A state of emergency shouldn't be viewed like the captain of the Enterprise shouting, "Red alert!" and little flashing lights coming down while the governor orders the police to open fire on a flood or something. No, it should be viewed like a starting pistol in a long race. Sure, it can marshal resources to the area, but it can do a lot of long-term things as well. Back to our example, the monsoon flooding from 2021. Do you know why the state of emergency hasn't been rescinded? Because as long as the state of emergency is active, aid can be received from the Federal Highway Administration to repair roads that were damaged by that monsoon. And the Federal Highway Administration has obliged. In FY22, they sent $1.3 million to Arizona, and in FY23, they sent an additional $1 million to deal with the road damage from that specific flooding incident. And this stretches across all types of disaster damage incurred, not just roads. That's money that the state of Arizona doesn't get if the Nimrods from the Arizona Free Enterprise Club get their way. Arizona having to shoulder the burdens of every single disaster that comes its way, because they wanted to throw a fit about COVID so they could fundraise some more money for their stupid political organization. But that's enough facts for now. Let's hear Aimee's brilliant response to the question if she thinks it's good governance to force the legislature into session every 30 days, just so states of emergency can be kept open to receive federal dollars for recovery. And I hope you have some Thousand Island dressing, because you are about to hear some word salad.
Yes, Chairman Senator Mendes, we think it's absolutely good government because the question that this would seek to resolve and legitimately any balance of powers provision in your Constitution is to balance what you're discussing, which is the practicality of responding to emergency, but then the idea that we have prolonged emergencies that never end would literally destroy our system of governance.
She's flailing so bad, I'm surprised I didn't hear cartoon sound effects in the background. She had no clue, and whatever that was, it was the rhetorical version of trying to get up after having the wind knocked out of you. In your Constitution! She still doesn't understand what Senator Mendes is talking about. She's trying to force a narrative of states of emergency being this massive, tyrannical presence in people's lives. But in reality, it's nothing more than a bureaucratic turn of phrase that allows states to receive federal aid. Again, just a small amount of research could have prevented this, but no, she saw the siege once, so she knows what a state of emergency is. Make way for the expert, she's a regular viewer of Fox News. By the way, it doesn't get better from here. Senator Mendes asks Aimee how feasible it is to constantly be recertifying states of emergency.
Chairman Senator Mendes, this policy would not purport to get rid of the mechanism to declare states of emergency by the governor. However, we think history is a very good indicator. If we would go down the line of logic that you lay out, you will inevitably sacrifice a good deal of civil liberties in the process if you don't have a mechanism in which to justify the ongoing suspension of those rights as granted as a part of those authorities that the governor has. And so when you consider the awesomeness of those powers, you have to also, in the long term, consider the appropriate constraints on them, or again, we will be doomed to relive historical precedents that has the trampling of civil liberties. And we think that is a grave threat also.
I'm going to be honest here. When I was in school and didn't do the reading for an assignment, I did a better job of covering it up. I mean, I never said anyone asking me questions about the Great Gatsby was responsible for America falling into fascism. Ugh. I do wish someone had asked her about what rights get suspended in a state of emergency she was talking about, but I mean, come on. How many times do you really want to take a spin on the random sentence generator that is Aimee Yentes? But we've only been hearing from Senator Mendes on this bill. Let's hear from Senator Sundareshan on this. She's always had a rather sharp mind. I'd love to see what she asks.
Ms. Yentes, so very much appreciate your desire to empower us in the legislature and in this discussion of balance of power. I'm also interested in the need for this particular form because I understand that last year, in response to the public health emergencies, that I know there was a lot of, resistance to the governor and other jurisdictions putting forward public health orders that served the public health. But in response to that, I understand that there already has been a cap placed specifically on public health emergencies, and so. What is the need for this particular version, which is very broad and applies to all the states of emergency out there? Can you explain? Because I'm worried it's excessively broad.
To address what Senator Sundareshan has said, and I talked about earlier, yeah, the legislature took a hatchet to the old state of emergency law last year. They placed heavy limits on states of emergency related to health. SB 1009 made it really hard for an extended state of emergency to be declared for health reasons. In other words, what the hell are you doing here? The thing you claim to care about has already been dealt with. What are you doing back? But we've already addressed this. The Arizona Free Enterprise Club revenues went through the roof during COVID, so they are milking the dairy cow of COVID scaremongering until that cow is dry. Now, don't worry. I'm not going to show you any more of Aimee. No more clips of her unable to answer very basic questions about her proposed constitutional amendment. I'll spare your ears that. I mean, what was she even going to say at this point? Instead, let's do something a lot meaner. I showed you one of Senator Sundareshan's questions. You know Aimee can't answer that. Aimee doesn't know anything about states of emergency. So how do Senate Republicans deal with this? Senator Sundareshan is just popping her right and left. This is humiliating. How can this be salvaged? Well, in the worst possible way. They call a metaphorical timeout and try to personally walk her through the defense of her position. Not kidding. Senator Jake Hoffman interrupts Senator Sundareshan to try and answer her question before Aimee can screw it up anymore.
Point of
Real
clarification.
quick, to that point. Ms. Yentes, you believed, I'm assuming here based on prior conversations we've had, but just confirm for me, you believed that executive power should have been reined in under Republican Governor Doug Ducey as well, correct?
Chairman, we supported this version of this HCR when it was run under the previous administration.
Yeah, thank you. And to that point, I just want to clarify for my colleagues across the aisle, because there feels like just a bit of defensiveness from you guys. And, maybe protectionism because you now hold the governor's office. But the reality is that, in my understanding, Ms. Yentes and her organization have had a track record of being bipartisan on this issue. They don't care who the governor is.
It would have been more dignified if Jake Hoffman had hopped off the dais, ran down to the podium, and used her like a ventriloquist dummy to give more coherent answers. This must be the most embarrassing moment of Aimee's life. Also, I believe this is called white knighting in conservative parlance. At least if my time on the internet is any indicator. And they frown on it, I think? Not important. Let's wrap this hearing up. What do Republicans have for their final arguments? Hoffman, you're up first.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights...
Oh, so they got hit so hard, he's quoting the Declaration of Independence in lieu of an actual argument. Well, I can't blame him there. That was a terrible hearing. I suppose we should be grateful he didn't bust out, "Webster's dictionary defines freedom as..." Oh, okay, so Hoffman has nothing. Up next, we got Oldie McOldster. What do you got for me on Prop 135?
Way back in 1993, when I lived in Snowflake, I went down to the town hall and wanted to look at the town ordinances because I was interested in how the government might be preparing for emergencies.
Sure, Old Man Simpson meme. Always a classic. All right, who do we have last? Oh god, it's Justine Watsack. Cross my fingers. Please don't be weird. Please don't be weird. Please don't be weird. I just want it to be slightly normal.
There was an example brought up of the drought and receiving federal funding. Well, if we just have an open-ended state of emergency with the drought and we don't do any checks and balances as to how that funding is being spent, has the drought issue been resolved as a result of that? That's a drought contingency that was in place since the 90s. Where are we with that?
Yep. It was weird. Also, how are you going to hold a drought accountable to checks and balances? You going to get a garden hose out and chase it down your car? Oops. Poor turn of phrase. My apologies. What kind of madness does it take to ask why hasn't the government solved the drought? The drought they are talking about has its own Wikipedia page. How stupid do you have to be to not know the effects of what this drought has had on Arizona? Do you even know what the Colorado River Compact is? Nope. Not getting sucked into this. Justine Watsack is on her way out the door, and good riddance. Now, after this hearing, Republicans very understandably had a little huddle about this bill and came to the realization they didn't want to show up 30 days after every disaster and 30 days after that for 5 to 10 years. So they limited Prop 135 in scope quite a bit. It now only covers disasters other than state of war, fire, or flood. And since that covers 90 to 95% of all disasters in the state, that more or less exempts most states of emergency, but not all of them. Which is the big problem with Prop 135. Let's say there is a disaster in Arizona. And what if it's a type of disaster that isn't a flood, fire, or state of war? Let's say it's a tornado or a winter storm or a particularly bad cyber attack. It doesn't happen often, but it can happen. So the governor has to call a special session so Republicans can judge whether the damage has been enough for a state of emergency to be justified so they can get federal aid. In the event of a bad cyber attack, do you trust someone like Justine Watsack to do the right thing and vote yes to continue aid to a community whose entire power grid has been disabled? Or do you believe she'd ask, why didn't you turn it off and then turn it back on? It works for me at home. In the event of a tornado, do you trust someone like Jake Hoffman to vote to continue recovery efforts the community needs? Or will he walk in, say the tornado is gone and the state of emergency should be ended? Neither of those people strike me as terribly sympathetic to the victims of disasters. And all of this is before we assume that Republicans aren't just going to vote no on continuing a state of emergency out of pique. Because Republicans aren't above punishing people they don't like by denying disaster aid. I remember Republicans blocking aid for 9/11 first responders who were suffering from cancer. I sure as hell remember Republicans after Superstorm Sandy hit the Northeast, and then saying, we can't do anything about aid because we don't want to put it on a credit card. Don't tell me they won't do it. I've seen them do it. So if you don't want to be depending on the goodwill of Republicans to protect you after a disaster, vote no on Prop 135. Arizona's emergency response policy deserves better than to be controlled by a bunch of idiots trying to fundraise. To quote Aimee Yentes,
And we think that is a grave threat also.
I'm History Sock, and I'll see you after the election.